Whether you want to improve your painting just for yourself or you want to go for the prestigious best overall prize at an event, my guest and I are going to discuss little ways that you can either get more points or just feel better about your own hobby. Stay tuned. My name is Tanya, otherwise known as the War Mistress. I've painted some minis, I've played some games, and I'm on a mission to be nice and roll dice. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Be Nice and Roll Dice. And I'm here today with my friend George, who's been one of my hobby friends since I started my first Instagram account. I think. So that's a long time. And we're here to talk about hobby. Hobby is something that I haven't really touched too much on this channel. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about paint, conversion, building models and all that good stuff because that actually takes up an equally huge part of my free time as playing the game does. So I'm excited to talk today, but George, why don't you introduce yourself to the viewers? Tell them a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Tanya. I'm really happy to be here. My name's George Thompson. I'm from a littler part of British Columbia than even Tanya is, but we love our interior of BC. And I think where we live is a place that almost naturally draws us to things like hobbying on small miniatures. I don't know. I could be wrong, but
It's
I
the
feel like I've
long winters.
asked people. Absolutely. The long winters help. The right levels of humidity and proper priming conditions almost all year. So it's a great place to be if you're interested in that kind of thing. I've been in this game, in this hobby since about 98. And I have really the painting and the building side of this has always been sort of my journey. I've always played as a secondary from the beginning, but trying to push myself forward in the hobby space has really been what's motivated me to stick around. That, and of course, meeting fantastic people like you.
Aw, thanks. So, I wanted to talk today about improving our hobby scores, and I thought who better to come on and talk to me about this than somebody who has judged my painting before.
That was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done at a Warhammer tournament. I still remember that lunch hour in August.
Running from table to table in like 35-degree heat, just like sweating profusely.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that experience too is interesting because being having your paint work judged takes a strong measure of confidence, self-esteem, putting yourself out there to hear what somebody else thinks about your work, but then to receive it in a way that hopefully lifts you up, elevates you, motivates you to get to the next step is what I put on my shoulders when I sit down to judge. Is I the last thing I want somebody to leave that experience with is I quit. I
Mhm.
want it to be more of a what's next
Yeah.
experience.
So I want to be like fully transparent with the people who are watching. I did not want to have my stuff judged, but you did not let me not have it judged. Um, so I didn't even look at the scores. I didn't because at that point in my hobby journey, I was so insecure as a painter, and I really was just on the journey to learn to love my painting myself, right? And I'm finally at that moment where I can look at my painting. I know where some of the flaws are, but now I'm okay with it because I really like my style. So I'm finally ready to make this video, right? Like if you would have asked me a year ago, I'd be like, "No, we can't talk about judging painting because I'm not secure." Um, but I'm there now. So we're going to talk about it. And yeah, I want to make this video very accessible. So we're going to talk a little bit about what judges are looking for and how we can make little changes or little things that can help us get a better paint score, if that's something that you want. You could also just be like me and be like totally okay with your painting where it's at, but maybe there's little things that you want to do to up the scores a little bit. So the first thing that I want to talk about is, and I do want to frame this in terms of events because I feel like a lot of people who watch are either new to the hobby, in which case a lot of these tips are going to be really useful to them in their hobby journey. Take what you want, leave the rest. But also there is a few people who go to tournaments as well. So that's why I want to frame it in this way. So the first question is, I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between best painted, best general, and best overall. Um, do you want to talk a little bit about the difference between those for us?
Sure. I think all three can mean slightly different things depending on which events you're going to. But our best general usually depicts the 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 level of play, the level of pilot, the level of commander of an army on the table. Where a best painted is usually doesn't matter whether you go oh for whatever or you win every game. It's how great your army looks, how cohesive it is, how much effort's been put into it, whatever the system is. Sometimes it's how popular it is. It's all about aesthetic. The best overall can be a combination of those things, sometimes in equal weightings, sometimes in different weightings. And it can even often include measures of sportsmanship as well. So, not just how well you pilot and command and how good you look, but how much fun you generate, how attractive your game is together. Those are actually my favorite experiences of best overall.
Hmm. I really feel like in our area, and I'm sure that you'll know the people that I'm talking about, the hobby tends to be actually quite high in our area. So for me, winning a best painted, I can't even see it in my future, but it's something that I do want to like strive towards slowly over time. Um, but I do want to say also in our area, I think that the best prizes go to the best sportsmanship award winner. Like we always let them get like first pick of all the prizes because that's the award that really matters, right?
Oh yeah, that's the person usually who has made the biggest impact on the most people at the tournament. So
Mhm.
yes, shower that person in rewards. I am nothing but inspired by great looking armies and exceptional tabletop tactics, but the person who keeps people coming back to the table is the person I admire the most.
Mhm. Okay, so we've decided maybe the best overall is something that we want to go for. So, I think that the best thing that we could talk about is maybe GW standards a little bit because they have recently, I guess like 2 or 3 years ago, actually settled in with what is battle ready and what is parade ready. So, I thought maybe we could talk about that a little bit. Is battle ready the three color minimum that we had heard for so long, or is it something different?
I think that Battle Ready is, and it was controversial when it
Hmm.
first came out in some spaces because of this, because it's more than just three color minimum. It's
Hmm.
saying three color minimum plus some effort to create the minimalist amount of immersion you can with the least amount of skill. Like you have products available today like contrast paints, all of the technicals on the market just from GW. That's just in that space. That with a little bit of practice and some tools, you can deliver a few different degrees of values in a model without all of that effort to blend and highlight that the battle ready standard isn't asking for. It's saying put a little bit of color on, make it look like there is something to it, like it's not just slapping three colors on or shooting color on three different spots of the model, and then give it a minimum base treatment. That's your battle ready. That's the minimum for GW events, and I applaud them for that. I think that has helped elevate things, and it's also helped, I think, to dispel some myths about how much effort it takes to get to that place.
Hmm. Hmm. I have recently been experimenting with different techniques to get above battle ready with the least amount of effort. So I might actually go over a few of those at the end of this if we have time. So that's battle ready. So what is parade ready then?
I think parade ready, you get a little bit more subjective in that space. The idea is that you take battle ready and then you do a little bit more. You're taking the battle ready place of the minimum standard of getting some immersion, and you're saying, I want to create a little bit more life. You're going to add a few highlights here and there. You might add more than the three colors. You might pick out more of those details. You want to do a little bit more to emphasize the sculpt itself, not just about getting a model on the table, but you're now starting to think about, I want somebody to stop and be interested in what I've created here. And it's, again, it's not to say that it has to be Rembrandt level museum quality, but we're talking about, that extra level of effort, those extra techniques, and in some cases, some of the tricks that can help you get to more of a parade ready place with a little bit more time into each model.
So, would you say that parade ready? And if anybody is interested in this, I'm actually going to post some links to photos GW has provided that tell us what they consider battle ready and parade ready. But is parade ready, in your opinion, as somebody who's judged models before, is that enough to get you a best overall or a best painted? And why or why
It,
not?
yeah, I mean, it certainly can be. I think there's a factor at play in any competition. Anytime you start slapping best onto anything, you have only the level of control you can give to your own submission into that contest. It's partly dependent on your community and who's coming to that event. Now, I'd say try not to think too much about that, because you can't. You're not going to go out of your way to Nancy Kerrigan, one of the top painters in the event, so they can't show up. But
I would hope not.
yeah, but what you can instead do is, and what we often see, and I think, to Tanya, your point about our community is, generally what happens, you start to surround yourself with exceptional hobbyists, and it almost forces you to get better, whether you like it or not. It's not by osmosis. You just are hearing everybody talking about techniques. You're starting to see things, varieties of things that are different and interesting, and you're challenging your own opinion of what might be great when you go to these kinds of events where there's high levels of hobby competition. So maybe the message I'm trying to leave is, don't seek out events that have low levels of hobby so that you can win best overall. Although that could be a great ego booster. I would instead, I would much rather place last at an event where it's like I worked my butt off and there's
Hmm.
nothing but exceptional armies. That's actually the dream for me. Is
Hmm.
like just stacked, beautiful armies, as opposed to showing up and being a shoe in because I sought out a place where
It's
nobody paints.
it's really interesting because like the area that you're in really does play a difference because I brought my orcs with me to Ontario and I played a few games while I was there. And when I told people that there's no chance ever in my local area that I would ever get best painted, their jaws hit the floor. So it was really an eye opener for me that like things could be so different on the other side of Canada than they are here. Um, but yeah, I think in general though, if people want to see some really high hobby, like high levels of hobby, and you want to learn something, those people who created those armies that you see at tournaments, they want to talk to you about it. They want to tell you how they did it. They'll give you all of the secrets because there's not really any secrets, I don't think. I haven't found any secrets anyway.
Most yeah, most of what is a secret is now on YouTube somewhere. But
Yeah.
you can, what you often won't hear is how many reps had to go into getting to that place. Like, very few people strike a best painted army on their first try. Most of the time, it's somebody's third or fourth layer of paint on that same army, or they've literally sold the army that they realized they leveled up their hobby on the last model, because now they wanted to paint a whole new army at that level of ability.
Yeah.
Something like that is usually the story you hear, or it's somebody like me who's been doing it for 20 years and has literally just slogged through. And quite frankly, it's embarrassing how little I've improved with how many
Oh.
years I have in. Well,
Mm-mm.
I hear you say things like, there's no chance I'm ever going to win that in our area. And I completely disagree because I saw what you brought to the table. We're talking about, this was 2020. This was that first glimpse after COVID started where we were thinking maybe, just maybe, COVID's over. It's summer
It
in
wasn't.
our area. It wasn't, unfortunately. We know that now.
Yeah.
But it was great to get outside. We had an outside event. It was
Yeah.
beautifully hot and sunny. Great picturesque scene for armies to be on display. And Tanya, you brought your Imperial Guard.
I
The Imperial
did.
Guard we've seen on many screens over time. It was, as far as paint quality is concerned, and this is I think a key ingredient to winning this is having not necessarily clean, realistic paint, but having purposefully clean uh, uh, aesthetics when it makes sense.
Hmm.
Your models and your textures were all really well laid down, and that was across every single model. Some paint judges do a sample of particularly rank and file, and this can oftentimes be a differentiator. It's really fun to focus on your sergeants and focus on your HQs and focus on the heroes and the big pieces, because I mean, why not? They are the showstoppers. But the paint judge often is going to pick up a few models in the rank and file and have a look and see how consistent is the quality. And when I look at your army and I see that there's like almost exactly the same level of quality in Joe Blow Private
It,
as
it
there is,
it took me
you
a
know,
long time to paint all that infantry. A very long time.
that's a showstopper in a horde army. When
Yeah.
somebody has put that kind of effort in, that can be something that drops jaws and has people going, wow. Like I can look at a standout in our area is Marshall Reeves.
Yes.
Incredible artist.
Lives in my.
Incredible.
He lives actually the next town over from me, and he's the
Yeah.
reason why I'm not ever gonna win
Well,
best
no,
painted.
Marshall is strategic. Marshall knows that he probably puts 100 hours or more into each one of his models. I wouldn't be
Yes.
surprised.
Me
And
neither.
so he fields armies where he can get an army on the table because he puts 100 hours into each one. Custodes, for example,
Oh, he's working
or
on sisters right
large
now.
point costs. I'm really excited to see that.
Yeah.
But I'm also excited to see, does he get that similar quality across?
Well,
Or
next time he comes to game night, I'll take a peek and I'll
do it.
I'll I'll take like a sneaky photo and I'll send it to you.
Please do.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we're talking about that being something that is often overlooked, and it doesn't mean that you have to put the same number of hours into a rank and file as you do a sergeant or an HQ, but it means you don't want to go battle ready on your rank and file and then parade ready on your sergeants if you are necessarily wanting to top the charts.
Hmm.
I think seeking that out across the army is an important piece.
Okay, so that is something that I would consider is probably in the rubric, which is, if people don't know what that is like the set scoring system set out by the tournament organizer or whoever, so that everybody gets judged on the same scores essentially. I believe at the tournament that we were at, you were using the GW rubric. Is that right?
Does it? I'm using a second or third edition of a rubric that we were graciously gifted or given with permission from a hobby legend down in Washington, Bob Kelly. We talk about him all the time on our show. But Bob, what that rubric does and what Bob really tried to do is inject in an objective way conditions that can help to further the hobby that he wanted to see in his area. And his area's community, the hobby meta, if you will, had the locals aware that if they were going to show up to events in that area, they needed to tick the boxes on this rubric. And if they were going to get half marks, something that they might want to set as an objective for a future event. Maybe it's something that they're getting half marks because they don't know how to get a full mark. And so on this event, they're going to seek out ways to figure that piece out, try and move it ahead. To be specific, something as simple as drilling out your gun barrels versus
I don't do
painting it
that.
flat metal. I'm mentioning that on purpose.
Hey, you,
and
though, you judged las guns. They don't have a barrel, thank you. I painted lenses on them.
okay. Well, see, there's effort there, but it's the flat paint and it kind of skipping that step that
Hmm.
can often be something that's on a rubric that says, hey, did you acknowledge gun barrels, or did you acknowledge eyes? Is and it doesn't say how. It's just more like, is it a Gilliman flesh wash over the entire face, and that's what you're done, moving on, or did you go in and try and pick out a pupil? And that can be the difference between a 0 or a 1 on a rubric score.
And I did every pupil on all of those guardsmen. No, I didn't. No, because they were wearing helmets. I did eye slits. I did lenses.
I picked the ones I picked up look consistent.
Yes. Yeah. So what other kind of things might be on this rubric? We talked about eyes, gun barrels, consistency. What other things might be on there?
Usually the rubrics have the bulk of the points are built around somewhat subjective terms that focus on the overall quality of paint, the overall quality of the construction of the army. Like, have you removed mold lines? Is there signs of too much glue being used? Are models broken? And then depending on what the community is striving for, like Bob Kelly, for instance, he really loves conversions, loves them, loves kit bashes, loves sculpting. So there is an equal weight given to an overall approach to conversion. That's not always in every rubric. I would say that majority of points come from those spaces most often, and usually those areas are set on a theme of, like, is your army and your models beautiful at arm's length, or beautiful right here, like right up close in your face? Like, where is that quality standard lying? And so there is a subjective element to that,
Hmm.
but it's usually that sets apart, kind of puts some of the armies into different categories and says, like, okay, here's somebody who's just getting started up, or here's somebody who maybe put a little bit less effort in. Here's somebody, like the battle ready, for instance. Here's somebody that's taking that battle ready and trying to push for a parade ready level, and I can see it starting to show up, but maybe it's not across the whole army yet, or maybe it's just needs to be a little bit more well executed, etc. And then there's that sort of that master quality. It's like, hey, we're getting into that space where you are executing brushstrokes with precision. There is meaning here, and there is clearly boatloads of effort. And so that's usually what kind of starts the process of isolating who is going to be in that contender category. The other points on the rubric, those nickel and dime points, like, did you drill out your barrels, they can sometimes be the difference maker.
Hmm.
You might have a master level army, but if the rubric is giving you 1 point for gun barrels, and 1 point for squad markings, and 1 point for maybe additional flavor on the basing, a little bit more than just dirt, maybe that cork I mentioned way back in the day, or some foliage of some kind,
Hmm.
that might be what sets you apart in the end, is just knowing what the rubric is and striving for it. And many of the people that I've competed with over the years, or in the case when I've scored, who have won, often know what the rubric is before they show up.
Hmm.
They either are building for it because they're used to seeing it, or they've asked for it well in advance so that they can make sure they're hitting those markers. A classic example is showing up with the display base for your models, and if
Wait,
that's on the
we need
rubric.
to real talk tournament organizers though. You need to put that rubric in the tournament pack. Am I right?
I completely agree. I
Yeah.
think, honestly, I think the rubric for appearance, like, why does it need to change that much year over year? Put that thing on your actual event site. It's
Hmm.
there. It's there and living. And maybe you bring feedback after the event, you edit it, but then it's right on the site and it's there, so that I can start building to my army 6 months before your event, even if it's not, me striving for best general or best overall. Maybe it's best paint I'm looking for, and I can start working on that early, even before
Hmm.
your tickets even go on sale.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah,
real talk on that.
I could
Best
see.
practice for TOs.
Yeah, I think that I could see the rubric change, like staying the same for like a season, right? You could change it once a year, but yeah, I have yet to see the paint rubric in any meaningful way in a tournament pack. And I would really, really like to see that, because otherwise, sometimes some people get feel badsies, right? Well, I didn't know that that was in the rubric, right? If it's up there, everybody can see this is how we're judging you and this is how you get points. So if that's something that you want, well in advance.
I think it's especially important if your tournament is going to have any kind of a hobby minimum. If
Yes.
you are announcing that even weeks before your event, it's going to come across with feel bads for sure. It's going to look a little bit like you're trying to gatekeep.
Mhm.
And that's certainly not what we want.
No.
And that's not at all the inspiration behind paint scoring, judging, rubrics. We didn't mention it before, but some events as well, they don't even use a rubric. They don't even use judges. It's completely community voted for
Mhm.
favorite army. And that informs, okay, you got the most votes for favorite army. You are the best painted at this event. So it's I would say the earlier the better. Get it out there.
Mhm.
Be
Mhm.
clear with your attendees, especially if you want the hobby to be an important part of your event. And if you want people like me and you to feel like we have a shot at contending, even if we have the Marshall Reeves or the Jim Vessel or
Yeah.
some of the really infamous people who buy commission painted armies that are absolutely bonkers gorgeous.
Bods.
Yeah, I was going to say his name. I have to pay him like $5 every time I say his name on any kind of
I
stream.
said it.
Thank you said it,
I
so
said it.
I'll pay for that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's and which is an entirely other subject on its own. But if you know that you're in a community like that, ask for this information early so that you can compete and
Yeah.
have fun with it, and probably push yourself further.
Okay. So you mentioned conversions, and this is something that I hate building models first off, and then conversions is something that I hate even more. So
High
if
five.
so knowing that that's how I feel about conversions, what can I do that might help me get some points in that rubric without making me pull all my hair out?
I can relate to this like you wouldn't believe, Tanya. Like I don't know. Most of the models that I buy from Games Workshop, I buy because I love the look of them
They're
already.
gorgeous.
There's
Yeah.
if it's not a model that I'm attracted to, I'm not, and maybe it's in me, but I don't stop and say, how can I make this model be more attractive to me?
Right.
I'm like, I'm
I
not going to
also
buy that. I don't
I
care
know
how good it is.
I know my limitations, right? Like I look at them like that's gorgeous. I can't do any better than that, you know?
Well, to answer your question, I think it's just like some of the questions that folks are asking when they're having a tough time getting to battle ready or taking battle ready to a parade ready level as they look at a paintbrush and they think to themselves, I can't do this. I can't get to that place. I don't have the skill. I don't have the time. I don't have the interest, but I want to. Maybe it's not actually me doing it, but I'd like to be able to snap my fingers and make it happen. That's kind of how I felt about conversions, especially in some of the spaces we went to where conversions on the rubric were worth as many points as paint. And
Mhm.
and I struggled with that for a long time. But I recognized that if I wanted to get a best painted title, or if I wanted to compete for best overall, which I have a tough enough time doing right now because I'm like a 2 and 3 player these days.
Hey, you
I
did
need to
really
get those
good when
points.
you brought a townar.
I that one time,
The one time I
that,
brought a
my
townar.
town are 4-1, but I'm anything else a 2-3. I have a, a a suggestion on that front, and something that I recommend is start with kit bashing and start simple. Don't worry too much about trying to create something that you have never seen before and that's going to blow people's minds. You'll get to that place, or you might get to that place by accident. But instead, how can you make your models a little bit more unique is usually the spirit of that rubric. If
Mhm.
there's something about your models that doesn't quite sit right for you, like for me, I see the beautiful custodes you've painted, and I think to myself, those are gorgeous, but something that irks me beyond all measure about custodes is their helmets. Oh my god, I hate them.
I hate them too.
I hate them.
That's why I 3D printed heads for them.
Damn. So this
Uh,
is the an early entry point. Most of the conversion rubrics will give you introductory points, those first few points for doing some head swaps, or maybe it's kit bashing some custom weapons to signify relics that are in your army, or It's changing up a pose that's normally a monopose model, and instead you're going to cut that guy at the waist, cut another guy at the waist, and make them look a little bit different. Where conversion gets interesting, I've heard stories from some players that are so good at it that sometimes their conversions look like legitimate models. So my other suggestion is keep track of what you do convert on your army. And most good rubrics will have an area for you to write down a few points that you want the judge to be aware of. Write down
Mm.
things like, yeah, you know how good those helmets look on my custodes. You might be thinking that's another option on the sprue. It's not. I had those, custom printed, custom 3D printed heads. I swapped those on. Whether GW likes it or not, I don't care. You're trying to make your models more unique and interesting and
Mhm.
appealing to you, and you went the extra mile to do it, and that deserves acknowledgement. If you did that perfectly seamless job of hacking those models at the waist, call that out on your notes so
Mhm.
that it's notable to the judge. And that's something especially important if there's points available on the rubric. The last thing I'd suggest is start challenging yourself to use a little bit of material, play a little bit with small areas, and try and get into that space of green stuff. Because green stuff work, and the more models that you have green stuff work on, is usually going to get you those full marks on conversion. Doesn't have to be fully sculpting models. It can be as simple as starting with, I'm going to put fur ruffs on the collar of all the cloaks that I have in my army. Or I'm going to plaster a shoulder pad and I'm going to scale it. You know, what it might be. There's some very simple green stuff techniques that you can check out online. Many talented sculptors, I don't have any to name right now, but that can be executed relatively easily with minimal tools and a little bit of green stuff.
And there's a lot of companies out there that are making a lot of tools and things that make working with green stuff a lot easier. Like for example, you can get a bunch of rollers where you can actually make like little tubes and stuff. So, yeah, there's lots of things that you can do with green stuff. I am not that great at it, but it is actually something that I do want to try out in the future. Is more sculpting for sure. That seems more interesting to me than kit bashing. But
I will say, if you end up in a position where you're having to do work on a model that you loathe, so if you're like, this model is the ugliest model in my collection, but it's good now and I need to build it and I need to get it on the table, that's a great candidate to go nuts on conversion. Because what's the worst that can happen? You completely botch it and you botched an ugly model and
oh
you make it
man,
out as
I
that.
just I just painted my Ogre Ma Tribe's Butcher, and the entire time I was painting it, I'm like, this model is terrible. This model is so ugly. Like, there's no amount of paint that can save this model in my mind. Man, I missed out on the opportunity to actually do
Not
something
too
cool
late.
with him. No,
Throw a
it
cape on
is.
that guy.
I don't want to go back now. He's done.
He's done.
He's done.
If your
Yeah.
list ever requires two, think about it next time.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so that's conversions. What are some things that we can do kind of easily in our paint jobs to elevate? So maybe we are beyond battle ready. Maybe we're at parade ready. What are some easy things that we can do to start getting points above and beyond in the rubric?
That's a great question. I think this is a space I'm still trying to figure out myself as an artist. I think the easy answers are trying to elevate your edge highlights, or first of all, even attempting edge highlights where it makes sense. Trying to execute some kind of a transition of color, whether it's with an airbrush or whether you want to try glazing or even layered dry brush. With some of the tools that are out there today, it's way more accessible than it ever was and can lead to much cleaner finishes. It can be trying your hand at some freehand work that takes into account, depending on where you're at with your freehand. Maybe it's simple numbering to start with. I'm just going to put ones on the sides of every shoulder pad on this first squad of intercessors. Or maybe it's I've done that before, or I already have one transfers. I'm going to try another simple symbol of some kind, but pushing yourself to try and take that next step towards adding detail or variation in your models, that is a sign of effort. And even if your execution is not perfect, the fact that you are trying often will get you points from the judge because they see the effort. They see what you're shooting for. And especially if if this is your first time, you're setting a bit of a baseline where you can indicate like, this is my first time at getting scored, and I am actually really interested in feedback on these specific elements. There's usually an
Hmm.
option for that on the judging page as well, is what do you want to learn from. So um, try a few of those things and think about adding those things into your notes to say, I'd really like your feedback on what I could do differently with respect to, let's just call it freehand for this time, because I really struggled with it.
Hmm.
Or I didn't so much, but I want to elevate it. How can I take it to the next
Yeah.
level?
And I do want to actually point out with something like freehand or edge highlighting, right? Like if you if you start doing it and it doesn't look perfect and you're not super happy with it, but just think about it. If you did it on between 30 and 100 models, you're going to get better at it as it goes along, right? And there's nothing saying that you can't, go back and revisit those edge highlights later. I think sometimes we forget too, like, you can go back and paint over your paint, right? So if you paint 100 models and then you paint 100 more and you go back to that first 100 models and you're like, I could do edge highlighting a lot better now, you can't just go in and try again. Like, there's nothing stopping you from trying again.
Chances are you're also going to paint more models. So even if it's just phasing out your earlier models for the ones that you've now started to get better at edge highlighting on, rather than feeling that fear, because I think there's a failure to launch sometimes in that notion is like, I know I suck at edge highlighting, so why bother? Well, the reason is so that you can not suck at edge highlighting eventually.
Hmm.
And yeah, it might take you a full squad, it might take you a full army,
Yeah.
but I would take note of where you started, like put a little marker on the bottom of its base or something like that. This is where I began. And then when you get to that place where you're like, okay, this is as far as I wanted to get, compare those two models.
This is
I'm
why I never sell.
guarantee you.
I never sell my models because it is a story of my hobby progress. I have my very first Chaos Space Marines and they are not very good at all, let me tell you. But I keep them because whenever I feel down about my painting, I can pick up those really ugly cultists and I can be like, Tanya, this is where you started. Now look where you are, just because you kept going, you know? So that's why I don't sell my ugly models. I keep them, and they actually help me sort of lift myself up. Another thing, I'm not allowed to tell myself that I can't anymore, and I'm not allowed to tell myself that I suck anymore. Maybe I'm not good at it yet. That's what I allow myself to say. And it's such a small thing, but it makes a huge difference in your hobby journey. Instead of breaking yourself down, like just embrace the journey. You're not where you want to be yet, but with every model, you're going to get there.
I have a saying when I go to events, because there's only going to be one person who wins best painted. There's only going to be one person who wins best overall. Sometimes there's second, third, you can kind of count on those. But the journey of getting to that painted army state, no matter what, whether I come in last, doesn't even matter. I win a painted army at the end,
Right?
and
I
I
get
get to take it home.
I get so much satisfaction from seeing a 100% painted army on the table. Like you can look at it and be like, I did that. That's amazing. Most people look at one of those miniatures and be like, I don't even know how you did that. And now look, you did it on like 50 models. You are a badass. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I try to remind myself of that. It keeps me going to these events, and events are one of the greatest motivators for me to get painting. So I don't. I hope to not stop that journey. I'm hoping to pull the band-aid and start hitting events again this year.
Yeah. I'm actually going to toss your cabers next weekend. So not this weekend, but the weekend after for the Age of Sigmar tournament. It's my first Age of Sigmar tournament. It's the first time I've been to Toss Your Cabers, which is a charity tournament in Vancouver, and I've heard a lot about it. So I'm really excited. And you will be very excited to know that I have a display board this time.
Oh,
Girl!
yeah, I think I was two pieces of feedback I left you with. It's like
Yes.
you would be up there contending. a little bit more effort into the bases, a lot of bit more display board, because I think you had what, a cafeteria tray.
I had a giant pizza tray. It was a pizza dough tray that I got at it was like a restaurant wholesale store. It was the only thing I could find that was big enough to bring a bunch of guardsmen from table to table. Yep.
Oh yeah, but man, I to see your Imperial Guard army on a display board in that same lighting, whew, that would have
Okay,
been something to
I
behold.
I do have to admit though, I didn't make this display board.
That's okay.
I
Can we
I
talk about that for a
commissioned
bit?
it from a local artist.
So, what are your thoughts on commission work and whether it should be allowed to compete or not?
I think if it is part of the rubric, you should disclose whether or not it was yourself or somebody else, and then I think it's in the judge's hands, right? Because I think some judges just really want to elevate the hobby. They want the tables to look really good when people are playing, and then other people look at it more of like an individual kind of basis, right? So I think if I were a judge, I would want it disclosed, and then if I would still give some marks for a display board that was commissioned, right? But I wouldn't give the same marks to that person as I did to somebody who made it themselves with their own two hands with love. That's how I would approach it, right? So it's greater than no display board, but it's less than the display board that that person made with their own two hands. Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
It does, yeah. I think that's
Yeah.
a take, and I think this is important here too, because that would be something that if your rubric 10, your rubric with display board by commission or not was going to be a factored in, that's a big reason why you'd want to communicate that early.
Hmm.
It's like, I'm not going to have time to build a display board or interest or ability. I'm going to get a commission. Yeah, I recognize I'm going to lose a few points on that on this rubric, but that's fine. My take on that piece, it was interesting you said should disclose it, because I think we don't usually see that expected at
Hmm.
events,
Hmm.
but there's this unspoken uh, rule. I don't know if rule is the right word. It's almost like this understanding that,
Guideline.
yeah, you really shouldn't take credit for somebody else's work. Like,
Hmm.
there are events, and it's normally when there are painting competitions. Like, you don't put somebody else's work into a painting competition,
Or
even
you
if you're
put it
trying to say it's
in.
on your behalf.
Yeah, like you put it
Yeah,
in for the painter,
yeah. If
right?
they allow
If
that,
they would
usually
want you to.
that's not even okay. But in the hobby space, I think it should be okay, because I think of what equity that brings to the table for everyone, whether it's, paying somebody just to build your army, or paying somebody to do some sick conversions on your that model that sucks because you hate it, and you're like, I can't do it, but I need something to, like, give this guy snake legs. I don't care what. Like, he can't come back to me looking like that.
Yeah.
Or it's the entire shebang. You're getting the whole thing done, kit and caboodle, because you don't have the time, interest, or ability.
Hmm.
That you should see recognition for that. But that person, for yourself, already doing it now, I'm sure you're going to tell at least a dozen people at Toss Your Cabers, I didn't build this display
Oh,
board.
I'm gonna put a
You put
business
it
card of
even
the
better.
crafter on it. Yeah.
So it's there's value in that too, because if your event wasn't going to allow commissions to score, then that commission artist might not get this business, might not
Hmm.
get this word of mouth marketing.
Yeah.
And so there's equity in that as well. So I think we should be more willing to embrace and welcome in that piece of the hobby. I do still rib Bods for the fact that he has painted during COVID, but those models don't usually make it into his armies.
I mean, to be fair, his commission stuff it's from Red Eagle.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's real good.
So he is supporting an amazing commission artist who also does amazing charity work. So, at least he made a good choice there.
Mhm, mhm,
Hmm.
exactly. So
Hmm.
but I think that's something worth talking about, and certainly tip ask. If your plan is to invest a bunch of money, and
Mhm.
not do anything else, and you're hoping about to win awards like this,
Mhm.
usually that's not why you get commission painted.
Yeah.
But uh, you don't want to be disappointed when you go to the event and learn that you're not going to be scored because it's not yours.
Yeah.
And please don't be tempted to say, "No, I did it. Seriously, it's mine. It's my work."
People there
That's
are
not
gonna
true.
know.
It often
Yeah.
works out that way. That's, if not because it's the right thing, save yourself the indignity,
Mhm.
because photos are going to be taken, especially if you win, and it will come out.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, sorry, but if you paid a lot of money from a professional commission artist, that's all that they do for work, people are gonna know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, display boards. I'm gonna tell you how I approached it. So, I knew that there was an amazing crafter in my town. Shout out to Josh, you're amazing. And I knew that I wanted a display board for my ogres. And I so I have pre-existing bases, so I took lots of pictures of the pre-existing bases because I said I want them to match. I don't He's a wizard. They match perfect. And then I told him a little bit about like the story that I wanted to portray on the board, right? So ogres are my ogres in particular are in a desert, but it's a cold desert because they are running from a magical winter because that's what ogres do. And so he made me this amazing desert base that has like a frozen lake and it's got like a mesa on it and it's just like so, like, I sort of told him the story that I wanted to tell, but is having a narrative on the display board, is that something that judges take into account, or is it just like technical skill?
It's interesting because I think I've seen it. I've seen them won both ways,
Hmm.
where it's merit on technical skill alone, and I've seen like one of the most impressive designs. And I'm not. I try really hard to give credit when I can, but I can't for the life of me remember this gentleman's name. One of the most impressive display boards I'd ever seen was this three-dimensional, multi-tiered mountain with cave systems for his Skaven converted Necron army. I think it was. It was something really, really out there. But it
Amazing.
was so cool because he had the entire army in diorama set up all over this thing. And then to go even further, he published a comic book that told the story of his diorama and had
What?
all of his characters in his army in it. And I'm like, dude, like, yeah, okay. Yeah, you win. So
That's
he
like
might have
next
got
level.
more. I think he got a few more points than just the minimum display board because he went that extra mile to create a narrative.
Hmm.
I've seen in rubrics where it usually says you got something, 1 point. You have like the FLG mat inside your tray, 1 point. Good job. Like there's something there to create some immersion.
Hmm.
I've seen it. Okay, now you've created something that where the effort now starts to show up, and that
Hmm.
effort is creating even more immersion. That's maybe 5 out of 10, and then the
Hmm.
10 is like you legit created a diorama. Your army is telling a story.
Hmm.
That story is cool. That's the full marks in most, but it's not always that way. Sometimes it's just you show up and you get the full mark for having the mat or the crazy cool cavern system with the comic book. But I
Right.
think that where that definitely gets noticed is when you have things like best paint based on favorite army. You do
Hmm.
stuff like that, you draw attention. You start turning heads. People stop and ask questions and are like, whoa, like this is so cool. It's drawing way more focal attention to certain models on your board, usually, because you have a design in a way that those stand out better.
Hmm.
And so there's both value in the points, there's value in the attention, and then there's also that strategic value of potentially even drawing the judge's eye to the models you want them to pick up.
Interesting. I mean, I feel like someday I will make my own display board. I'm not there yet. I don't have a lot of room in my house. I will someday. It'll probably be for my custodies actually because I actually really enjoy basing and I actually feel really bad that you actually had to see my Imperial Guard because I don't do any basing on them, right? Like I got like 100 models in this army Right. So I just really don't do that much with them, but my custodies have like an autumn kind of like deciduous forest kind of basing going on in them. Um and I actually really love basing. So I think someday I will do a diorama sort of to complement the basing that I have in my custodies. Um Basing's important though, right?
I would say so. There's an old adage. I can't remember who at GW was first coined on it. It came out of a first 100 print white dwarf at God knows when. But the old adage is faces and bases.
Mhm.
Faces and bases, and your models look aces is usually what is said.
Oh, it's
And
so
so
cheesy. I love it.
it is so cheesy. I you know what? I haven't got a tattoo yet, but I think that might need to be my first tattoo. I don't know where it's
Uh,
gonna go. We'll figure that out later.
just get
But the
Nux face base.
yeah,
People be like, "What?" You're like, "Only OGs know."
it's my first tattoo and my only tattoo. I'm gonna have to think about that. But I think it rings true. I don't think alone that's as important, like when you're trying to set yourself out, but definitely when you're going that first step away from battle ready, try to elevate first your faces and your bases. And the bases are fun. They can be fun. They can be very approachable depending on how you like to approach your bases. There's
Mhm.
lots of different ways to do that. Whether you're the person who likes to do the entire army's bases separately sub-assembled at the same time, however many sessions it takes, get them all done, and then glue your models on. I don't have that kind of patience. I like to see my models as complete as possible when I'm painting. It's awful. I probably waste tons of time doing it, but I'll do the base construction while I'm building models. But I'll aim to sort of tick some fairly fairly standard boxes while I'm doing it. Things like try to keep my bases from looking flat, try to have the basing design add to the movement of your model, like help it add emphasis to how your model's standing. If they're stoic, it should be a little bit more of that hero hammer, hero rock, whatever you got.
Tactical
uh,
rock.
Tactical rock, sure. The grudge stone, if you will. You have and it doesn't necessarily mean that your model, your base has to be three-dimensional just in the earth side. It can be that you achieve that three dimension through some of the emphasis you put into foliage, or some of the extra gribblies that you add, like skulls or bits. Usually if you apply three different techniques, it usually hits most rubrics strong. So your flock, a paint coat of some kind, not just flock and done. It's like a flock with paint, and some one or two three-dimensional elements of some kind is sort of that army painter-esque rubric. Somebody that or a company that's amazing, and if you're not following them, you should be. A little Instagram 3D printer who does amazing basing tutorials as well. I can't decide which I like more. They're 3D printed little gribblies that you can add to bases, or their tutorials that they put up all the time is called Make It Epic. And
Make it
Make It
epic.
Epic is on Instagram. You should check them out. Oh my god, they're probably, I haven't made an order yet, but when I do, I'm probably going to be broke because it's such cool stuff.
Well, shipping is so
And
expensive, so you have
oh
to buy a lot, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean that what I really appreciate about it, you don't have to necessarily spend a dollar, although you should if you really like the product, like support the artist. But it's their tutorials are so good and so accessible, and he adds these really interesting points. He does a lot of, he goes on nature walks and starts to point out how certain things in nature can appear on your basing so that your basing looks more realistic, and that
Mhm.
it doesn't actually take any more effort. It's just a recognition and a little bit of planning and execution. It's quite cool, and I strongly encourage you checking them out.
Yeah, I've actually been so for my night haunt is a new army for me. I actually got it because I wanted to paint it like an album cover. So I wanted to paint them like the album cover of As I Return to Nothingness. It's an EP by Lorna Shore. And for their bases, I actually just went out and like got dead sticks that had fallen on the ground because in the album artwork, it's just like a bunch of fallen trees. Like it almost looks like it could be a battlefield of some sort. That's everything's just all black except for this like ethereal kind of mist that's like around everything. So I just glued a whole bunch of actual sticks from outside with some rocks and some skulls and whatnot, and then I painted it all black, and then I made a wash of this like it's actually rust gray, I think, and
Mhm.
then I washed it in so it kind of looked like it was glowing from underneath.
So you have the three dimensions, you have the paint effort hit to that model, and it's interesting. It's adding dynamic appeal to it. You might want to do something to sort of pop a little bit more out of the base, not just with the color, but maybe there's some like usually it's a tuff that most people use, but I think you can do better than that. Something that's more apropos to the album cover or to the band or to the EP, like something that makes sense. But I'll leave that with you to decide.
I'll have to
And
mull it
that's
over because
probably
it's
full
it,
marks.
it's pretty bleak. The album artwork. Uh, yeah.
But I think what this make it epic has opened my eyes to, and this is something I caution you in really embracing until you're committed to rebasing an army. But is the notion that almost all bases that are sold with miniatures today are flat, but nowhere in nature, not even the best carpenters usually achieve flat ground. So
Hmm.
how can you make that piece more accessible? And it's almost in every one of their videos. They're like, yep, the first thing I start with is unflattening the base. And they use a little bit of milliput and they just go, and it's like almost no rhyme or reason. Just make it not flat. And
Hmm.
that's it's incredible how much that creates a dynamic appeal on one model.
Hmm.
But imagine that over the course of an entire army. And that's actually what I'm looking at when I'm seeing your night haunt there is how cool that stick effect and glow is going to look across the entire force.
Yeah.
Because that's where the impact comes from great basing. It's when you see that whole model together. And often the base design will unify the army, even if your color palette is not unified. So either by choice or by design, depending on the faction. Like
Hmm.
Eldar, for instance, great example. Very few Eldar armies are unified by fluff standards, but the basing is what keeps them cohesive.
Yeah. I really enjoy a cohesive look. Like I probably will go back to my Imperial Guard at some point and figure out I was thinking about maybe doing like razor wire or something like that on them. So I'll probably go back and revisit them. I just have other projects that have tickled the old brain these days. So it's just working on this night haunt, working on my ogres. But I enjoy basing. Like I have an entire like organizer in my game slash hobby room, and it's just all like tufts and flock, technical paints, like all sorts of goodies.
Yeah,
And I mean sometimes it's just rocks that we find out collecting and
right.
sticks and stuff.
So I've mentioned this before, but I hate two things almost more than anything. There's like cancer's awful, but these things are close thirds or fourths. One is going to dollar stores, and two is going to garage sales. And my wife likes to do those things more than anything. So
Yeah.
the way I've gotten around going to those things with her is they are my base material hunting grounds. I go into the dollar store and I have a look around at what new rocks have they brought in the aquarium section, or how
Yeah.
many sheets of cork can I buy for $1 today? And then
Yeah.
I go to the garage sale and it's all sorts of treasure that you can pull out of there that can be smashed apart and become basing material. But I've got
Mhm.
a tickle trunk too of basing stuff, and I'm not ashamed to admit it.
Right, and I don't know why, but I find it really inspiring when I start a new army to just like go into this amazing organizer full of goodies and be like, hey, what story do I want to tell on these bases? Because I've got all this stuff in which to do it. And um, if people don't take anything else away from this, I think it's really good to like follow your passion, right? So for me, my passion is paint and basing, and that is where I'm going to spend the majority of my time because that is where my happy place is. However, I do want to at least dabble in the other aspects that don't do it for me because, maybe I'll learn to love it. Or if nothing else, it'll just make my models look better. But it's okay to hang out in your comfort zone most of the time. Hmm.
Absolutely. I feel the same way. And try to push yourself. You don't have to convert your entire army to get rubric points for that if that's not what you're into. But maybe it's one model in your army that you're going to try it on.
Hmm.
Start small.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so here's something that I actually don't know the answer to this because I'm sure every judge is different. But there are lots of people out there, I consider myself one of them, who paint in a very stylized way. Um, the biggest critique that I get from people on the internet is that my stuff is not grim dark enough. Um, which I don't care what they actually think because I like my style. I've developed it through the years. It's something that makes me really happy. But when we're going into a judging scenario, is being a more stylized artist going to help or hinder? And I know this is probably going to be different based off who is judging, but in your opinion, does it help or hinder?
Hmm. I don't know if it's as easy as answering that question, Tanya, because there's merit to both. And I think where stylized painting helps is when you embrace it. If it's something that you recognize as your signature and it's applied across your army, it's adding more emphasis to that consistent effort, that consistent execution that we talked about earlier on in this episode. If you are stylized in one form, or if you're stylizing because you're trying to emulate somebody else, that can sometimes hinder you.
Yeah.
But it's part of the journey. It's part of the journey. Because I think that in order to find that place that is your style, you do have to do some trial. You do have to do some bag borrowing and stealing to find out what you like. And oftentimes, what you'll land on is this kaleidoscope of different styles combined, especially when
Mhm.
you've done a lot of painting at some point.
Mhm.
And then you also, I think there's almost a maturity that lands there too, like a painting maturity, not like a actual. I'm the least mature person
I
to
don't know. I could
make
give
this
you a run for
comment.
your money there.
But if you are at a place where you're not sure what your style is or what style you even like necessarily enough to execute across your models, you might not have landed at this place of painting maturity that I'm mentioning, where you sort of accept who you are as an artist or how you execute work. And it's taken me 20 years to realize that I don't have to keep trying to get to heavy metal style. That's not me. I don't paint that way. I
Thank
paint
goodness, because your
parts
style's
of it.
really cool.
Well, and I like it. Like it's probably holds me back in some spaces, but
Mhm.
where it doesn't, I think, is when I landed across an army. Like I'm a single display model. I'm not going to win that painting competition with my style, and I know that.
Mhm.
I know that. But when I execute an army in my style, and it's an army that fits well with it, and it's great colors that lend to that style, I'm very happy with my outcome, and unfortunately, it's probably yellow because I can't seem to paint anything else.
Yellow's a color that I've not really tried yet, so
Mine's more like a yellow brown, but
yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah, it's often where I end up landing as I'm trying to play with paints, like, and it's yellow
It's yellow.
again.
Red has always been the color that I've struggled with, and it's funny because now I have red Custodes and now I have red Night Haunt. So sometimes embrace those colors that you're having troubles with because they might just end up being one of your signatures one day.
Oh,
Yeah.
exactly. I definitely have to take my own advice on that. It's just I just need to try experimenting more with colors I'm not comfortable with.
Hmm.
Often cold colors, I realize. So it's, yeah, putting yourself out there and not being afraid to maybe mess that model up, because you can always paint it again.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to end off this segment with a tip for painters that could maybe help them elevate their painting with minimal effort. And I'm going to start with mine first. And forever, I was the person that was like, unless you're using a transparent paint, don't zenithal prime. Okay? But I've changed my mind because all of my Night Haunt are zenithal primed, black underneath and red on top. So I don't have to actually paint the red on top besides the highlights, and it's saving me so much time, and it looks so freaking good. So that's my tip for you. Maybe consider zenithal priming with a color instead of white.
I'll take that away. Do you want me to give one too?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go in a different space, and I'm going to take to the person who is right now edge highlighting and feeling okay about edge highlighting, but not knowing where to go next. And my tip to you is consider the power of the dot. It's like the edge highlight for edge highlights. Look for those parts where the light directly impacts a surface. Often it's a corner, and just take that edge highlight color, add a little bit of white, put a little dot in that spot. You will be surprised how much more striking your edge highlights become with one dot.
You'll be like, I'm a genius.
How did I do that?
This looks so good. This has been so fun, George. I miss your face. I can't wait for us to be able to meet up at events again.
Well, I won't be at Toss Your Cabers, but best of luck there. It's been a blast, Tanya, as always. Maybe Boardroom Brawl this August.
It's a team tournament, and I can't find anybody who wants me to be on their team.
I mean, I can't either. So maybe this is happening.
Amazing. So, where can people find you out there in internet land?
I have 2 places. I'm mainly on Instagram these days. I think George T Paints, george.t.paints on Instagram. Reach out anytime. Love to hear from everybody. And then I'm a co-host on a banter podcast, but I try at every junction to inject hobby talk. And our little podcast is called Beyond the Battlefield. It's from our team, the BC Battle Brothers. It is very much not for children, but it is a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. If you love banter, which I do, I love banter, and maybe the inappropriate humor here and there, then you will really enjoy Beyond the Battlefield. And you guys better put out new episodes soon.
We're trying.
Okay.
Our producer is taking the reins and he's going hard. So we'd love to hear from you there as well.
All right. I'll make sure to link all that stuff in the description down below for everybody to check it out. Thank you so much for being my guest today, George. This was a blast.
My pleasure. Great to see everybody. Take care.
Alright folks, I want to know, do you have any tips for me to help me bring my painting up to the next level? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're down there, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the bell, all of that stuff, because it really helps the channel out. If you want even more content, make sure to follow me on Instagram. You can also find me on Forge the Narrative podcast. And if you're looking for a supportive community to join, you can hit up my Patreon exclusive Discord by following the links down below. And until next time, everybody, be nice and roll dice.